Gen X Horror. We talk about all things 70s and 80s horror and nostalgia. Today we're diving deep into 6 obscure horror and thriller titles that defined the VHS era for those of us who weren't satisfied with mainstream scares, man. These are the movies that got buried on bottom shelves, the ones your local Blockbuster only had one copy of, and the films that made you feel like you discovered something crazy forbidden. And hey, stick around until the end because we've got a special deep dive on one film from the list that had the director hanging warning signs on the soundstage door and cast members standing in prosthetic makeup for hours while covered in, you'll see. The behind the scenes stories alone are worth the wait. Not only that, pay attention and count how many connections exist in a handful of these flicks to Michael Myers. And to be honest, it's completely unintentional on my part. We're taking a nostalgic ride through 6 of the most cooked films that'll make you question why anyone thought practical effects and zero budget constraints were a good combination. Alright gang, let's get into it.
Carl Raymar died of an apparent heart attack, but the bizarre condition of his apartment and the true cause of death of the missing girls remains a mystery.
To be fair, he died abruptly and didn't keep a tidy place. That's all we can say. Don't condemn the man. I'm sure one of us grabbed this banger from the bottom shelf at Village Video and rode our BMX home to scoot down into the basement and slide this bad boy into the VCR. Man, the couch was warm and the yoo-hoo is cold, and 1982's One Dark Night delivers exactly what 13-year-old you wanted. A night in a mausoleum with telekinetic corpses and the worst initiation ritual ever conceived. And hey, stick around to hear how this flick not only has a Michael Myers connection, but also a Christopher Walken connection. Hottie Meg Tilly plays Julie, a high school girl who has to spend the night in a creepy mausoleum to join an elite clique. And in all actuality, I can't think of one clique in high school that you needed to commit breaking and entering into a mausoleum of all places to join. But either way, she discovered a dead Russian psychic named Raymar who has the ability to reanimate corpses with his lingering brain energy. Meg Tilly was incredibly uncomfortable shooting in the actual mausoleum. Her reactions to her surroundings were often pretty damn genuine. During the scenes where she was hysterical, she actually did throw herself into hysterics, and it took her a while after each take to calm herself down. And honestly, it's a lot of dead bodies to be surrounded by, so I get it, but I think Jennifer Tilly probably could have pulled that off while laughing the whole time. No shade to Meg. The film's director Tom McLaughlin would go on to make Friday the 13th Part 6, which explains the surprisingly decent atmosphere and practical effects. Those floating, decrepit bodies shuffling through the marble halls genuinely delivered the goods. The face of Carl Raymar was sculpted from a real-life mask of Christopher Walken, and it's hard for me to make out, but I can kind of see it. And unrelated to Walken, if you look close enough, there is a headstone in the cemetery briefly seen reading Myers, a reference to Michael Myers. Tom McLaughlin wanted it to actually say Michael Myers, but the production designer feared, man, this could be some legal troubles. What makes this one special is how it commits to this crazy premise without winking at the audience at all, treating telekinetic necromancy with the same seriousness as a John Carpenter film. And that final sequence where corpses rain down on our heroes still hits different when you're watching this at 2 a.m. This was the kind of movie that made you check under your bed before sleeping. Not because it was genuinely terrifying, but because it lodged itself into your brain with its commitment to pure, uncut weirdness and a good amount of jump scares.
An escape from the psychiatric hospital in the area. You best be on your way.
I'm new here. That's a wild call out when you're being strangled. Hey, if you manage to track down the Freeway Maniac at your local mom and pop rental shop in the late 80s, you were in for a wild ride, man. Let's take some time to go over this one, and much like One Dark Night's notable mentions, we've got a few more here that have ties to Clint Eastwood and about as close as you can get to Michael Myers compared to the headstone from One Dark Night, and literally, you couldn't get closer than we will get, so pay attention, man. This gloriously unhinged slasher follows Arthur, an escaped mental patient who strangles old and new employees on his way out and crashes a desert film shoot and starts picking off cast and crew members, wild animals, and anything that gets in his way all day long. Director Paul Winters crafted what can only be described as an insane, a legitimately incoherent blend of slasher tropes and Hollywood satire, complete with a final girl actress who keeps surviving Arthur's attacks through sheer luck and the killer's apparent inability to finish what he starts. The film was shot on a tiny budget that's pretty evident, but has some great scenes that work to overcome it for sure. From the questionable stunt work to the fact that the freeway scenes appear to be filmed from the same exact stretch of California desert road from maybe like 12 different angles. A couple of neat debuts popped in this flick as well. It's the debut film of Kimber Eastwood, which is Clint Eastwood's actual daughter, and James Courtney, Michael Myers in the 2018 Halloween. What separates this from pure trash territory is its weird sense of humor about itself. There's a self-awareness that makes you wonder if everyone involved knew exactly what kind of midnight movie madness they were creating. And that always makes it more endearing, like when Arthur shows up in a cowboy outfit to terrorize people at a gas station. That's a vibe, man.
There on that hill. You hear a lot of strange stories about that place.
What kind of stories?
Centuries of ignorant superstition. Black magic.
Look, we need to talk about Lucio Fulci for a second. He's the Italian genius that gave us Zombie and The Beyond. Absolute classics of gore and atmosphere that influenced everyone from like Quentin Tarantino to Rob Zombie. Demonia, which is also called Liza in some circles, came late in his career. And while it doesn't reach the heights of his earlier work, it's got that signature Fulci touch. A Sicilian nun with a dark past, crucified corpses coming back for revenge, and enough Catholic guilt to make your grandmother clutch her rosary and Fred Sanford scream, "You hear that, Elizabeth? I'm coming to join you, honey." But I digress. That's a weird aside. The story follows a Canadian archaeologist named Liza, played by Meg Register, who arrives in Sicily to excavate an old monastery, only to unleash the spirits of 5 nuns who were crucified centuries ago for, well, let's just say their sisterly bond got a little too intense. We're going to leave it at that. Shot in 1989, but not widely released until the early 90s. Demonia, I keep saying, is it Demonia? It's not going to be Demonia, because it's Italian. Demonia. Either way, it suffered from horrible pronunciation by me and budget cuts that are painfully obvious. The gore effects that Fulci was famous for, they actually look rushed, and some scenes feel like they were missing crucial establishing shots, like they're just out there. But there's still that dreamlike, hallucinatory quality that made his 70s and 80s output so mesmerizing. Fulci disowned this movie before the release. He also tried to have his name removed from the titles, with no success. Demonia was described by the author of Splintered Visions, Lucio Fulci, and his films as Fulci's would-be return to theatrical films. The film failed to receive any theatrical distribution anywhere. The film was released directly to video in Italy, and it would not receive an official release in the United States until 2001. I mean, it's not really a review, those are just facts. Critics absolutely savaged this one upon release though, calling it a tired retread of his earlier themes. Fulci would later describe the film as a wonderful movie, ruined from very bad photography, and that's that. Howarth described it as one of Fulci's weakest films, an incoherent mishmash of the ghost story and nunsploitation genres, and that it had only a few flashes of the director's distinctive style. It's probably true. But for VHS completionists, hunting down every Fulci title, this was a necessary piece of the girls gotta have it puzzle, and that opening sequence of the nuns being crucified remains genuinely disturbing in a way that transcends the film's technical limitations. Holy hell, where do we even start with Devil's Story? This French horror film is what happens when someone gives a camera to a director with big ideas, zero budget, and possibly no understanding of conventional narrative structure. It's beautiful chaos, man, and that's what we love. Let's see why one reviewer cited this flick as the reason the French avoid splatter altogether, and what connection this entirely French-filmed flick has with Florida, of all places. The plot, and I'm using that word generously here, involves a deformed Nazi soldier who's dressed more like he's in a Confederate marching band, a mummy, a corpse or vampire adjacent woman, and a black cat that may or may not be Satan. It's got a beached pirate ship in the middle of the countryside and a horse that gets more screen time than most of the human cast. Oh, and a hottie in a raincoat, and she was my focus to get me through this one. Director Bernard Luneau financed this one himself and shot it around his property in Brittany, which explains how he can finance this in the first place and why the geography makes absolutely no sense, and also why the same exteriors keep appearing from different angles, as if they're entirely new locations. I see what you're doing. What you need to understand is that Devil's Story operates on dream logic, or nightmare logic. Really, where things happen because they happen. And connecting point A to point B is for Hollywood movies and their fancy scripts and continuity interns keeping tabs on things. It's really like a poorly written Transylvania 65000 in my honest opinion. The film has achieved legendary status among bad movie aficionados precisely because it's so earnestly weird. There's no irony here, just pure unfiltered vision from someone who clearly watched a lot of horror movies and decided to throw every single idea and stretch 20 minutes into one 76-minute package. Oddly enough, for a French film, one of the automobiles used in the film has Florida state license plates that are pretty clearly seen at minute 14 and 55 seconds. And I couldn't find out how that happened at all, but with Devil's Story, honestly, I don't know, man, it makes perfect sense. In the movies most critics won't write about, author and critic Clive Davies described the film as 75 minutes of near catatonic nonsense, which means 1 minute was great, with a dumb circular ending. And Scott Ehrenstein wrote in his The Gorehound's Guide to Splatter Films of the 1980s, despite the charming contrivances, Devil's Story is just one more reason why French cinema rarely ventures or strays into splatter territory. And if Stein hated it, now I'm hunting more French horror trash. Help a brother out, man. What do you guys got for me? I'll close with this meandering Tarantino-esque shot of Veronica Renault's feet as she paces for what really feels like 10 minutes of looped film that I edited down for time. But it's toes after toes after toes after toes, and a cat for some reason.
How do you like your tea? Cream? Sugar? Or do you want me to pee in it?
Man, I can't even come up with a good transition from that. Either way, you're in for a treat. Hear me out, man. Mad shout out to the comments for recommending this one. Society is legitimately brilliant. And if you haven't seen it, put it in your queue, because later on you're going to hear me say shunting. And go ahead and scoot up to the edge of your seat for that one, because the director had to hang a warning sign when shooting these shunting scenes. And honestly, I'm not even sure what I can or can't show here. Director Brian Usna, producer of Reanimator, crafted a crazy, scathing satire about class warfare wrapped in body horror so extreme it makes David Cronenberg look restrained, and that's not hyperbole, man. Yet somehow this masterpiece got lost in the direct-to-video shuffle for years, and I'd guess it's because production-wise it was swirling in chaos. The story follows Bill Whitney, a seemingly perfect Beverly Hills teen who slowly realizes his wealthy family and their elite social circle are literally not human. They're parasitic creatures who maintain their lifestyle by shunting, a process where they absorb the poor and downtrodden through grotesque bodily fusion that has to be seen to be believed. And man, honestly, how many of us would already be shunted by now? While shooting the infamous shunting scenes, Brian Usna would put a sign on the soundstage door that read, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," and that is 100% downplaying it. What separates Society from every other film on this list is the jaw-dropping practical effects work by Joe Gittani or Screaming Mad George, and I can probably only pronounce one of those names correctly, and you can guess which one. Either way, the final X shunting Palooza sequence I mentioned remains one of the most disturbing, creative, and weirdly beautiful pieces of body horror ever committed to film, with bodies melting into each other like human Play-Doh in ways that seem to defy physics, good taste, and, man, all things holy. The film works on so many levels. It's genuinely scary, darkly and refreshingly funny when it needs to be, and the class commentary hits even harder now than it did in 1989, basically predicting every Eat the Rich meme 3 decades early. Critics who actually saw it praised the effects and Usna's direction, but Society was barely released theatrically in the US and found its true audience through VHS rentals and late night cable, where it became a rite of passage of horror fans who wanted something that challenged them rather than just delivering the same slasher beats and jump scares. If Devil Story is what happens when someone makes a movie with zero plan, Society is what happens when someone has a very unorthodox, specific, very disturbing plan and the technical skills to execute it just flawlessly.
He is here to protect and serve.
Looks like you need a policeman.
His job is to safeguard the innocent.
What was that?
Pursue the guilty.
Remember when direct-to-video horror figured out that putting Psycho in front of any profession automatically made it marketable? Psycho Cop delivers what the title promises, a devil-worshipping police officer named Officer Joe Vickers who murders people while spouting cop-related one-liners that make RoboCop look like Hemingway, man. There are good cops, there are bad cops, but there is only one Psycho Cop. I mean, oh man, that's so good. The plot is simple and clear for a change. 3 couples rent a cabin for the weekend, and man, here we go again with 80s cabin rentals, and encounter Officer Vickers, who's pretty much possessed by Satan and uses his badge as an excuse to torture and kill anyone who seemingly randomly just crosses his path, or his beat, or whatever, because I don't think he clocked in for any of this. Director Wallace Potts made this for close to nothing, but honestly that doesn't show at all. The kills are creative despite the limited budget, and Robert Schaefer's performance as the Psycho Cop walks that perfect line between menacing and campy. His smile is haunting, man. What makes the flick work is its commitment to everything. Vickers treats every murder like a traffic stop, complete with deadpan delivery of puns like, "You have the right to remain dead," before dispatching his victims. It doesn't get any better than that. My only criticism is the entire third act should have been when everyone was, winding down and dressed for bed in 90s or what have you, whatever they wear, I don't care. But they were dressed in yacht shorts and their Sunday's best, and you don't want to see people running around like that. I don't. The film found enough of an audience on video store shelves to warrant a sequel. Pun totally intended there. Which was titled Psycho Cop Returns, and it's somehow even more perfect. And it represents that sweet spot in late 80s horror where filmmakers knew their limitations and leaned into them rather than trying to compete with bigger studio productions. Camp was rampant in the late 80s, and Psycho Cop was the perfect icing on the cake. Scott Aaron Stein, again, author of the Gorehound's Guide to Splatter Films of the 1980s, I should probably pick up that book, referred to Psycho Cop as completely lifeless, homogenized fare, further hampered by the grating Robert R. Schaefer. First off, Robert R. Schaefer was amazing in this. Well, conversely, Kent Byron Armstrong, writer of slasher films and international filmography, 1960 through 2001, that's a wordy title, found Schaefer to be great and opined that Psycho Cop provides enough humor to be an enjoyable film. But man, did I have to dig into a filmography spanning 41 years to find someone saying, no, this is pretty good. Either way, come on, Stein, be cool, man. Now it's time for the bonus deep dive, and you guessed it, man, it's 100% Society. We really need to talk about 89 Society in more depth because the film is an absolute rabbit hole of fascinating production stories that deserve way more attention. Thanks again for the recommendation in the comments from Vinny G on the Luther the Geek video, man. I'm glad I didn't miss that one. While most 80s horror directors were content to crank out another Friday the 13th knockoff, Brian Usno was out there trying to create something that would literally melt your brain and fuse it with a far richer, more elite brain, if you're lucky. And he succeeded in ways that still feel dangerous and incredibly edgy even today. Here's the thing about Usno's approach. Brian stated that he reverse engineered the entire plot based on whatever insane special effects ideas Screaming Mad George came up with, prioritizing surrealism over traditional narrative logic. And yeah, man, this wasn't a carefully plotted screenplay that got enhanced with effects as they told a story. This was, what if bodies could melt into each other like taffy first, and then figuring out how to build a story around that nightmare second? It's the complete opposite of how you're supposed to make movies, and somehow it resulted in one of the most coherent and thematically rich horror films of that decade. Usno cited The Spiral Staircase from 1946 and Rosemary's Baby as his primary influence for the paranoia elements, which makes total sense when you watch Billy's slow realization that everyone around him is part of this conspiracy. That old school thriller dread permeates the entire film once you look back on it. The production itself was absolute chaos, as you would imagine. They shot the entire thing in just 5 weeks, which is insane considering the complexity of those practical effects. During those infamous shunting scenes, oh god, just pictured it. Usually would literally hang a sign on the soundstage door reading, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," because the crew were legitimately grossed out and borderline traumatized, which tells you everything about what was happening behind those closed doors. Actor Evan Richards, who played Milo, described filming the shunting orgy as extremely uncomfortable, standing in prosthetic makeup covered in KY jelly for 2 to 3 hours at a time while pretending to merge with other human bodies. That may be another Saturday night for some of you guys, but for Milo, it was a rough time, man. And here's a brilliant detail. Yuzna deliberately avoided using blood in those sequences because he was terrified the MPAA backlash. So instead, everything is this flesh-toned, gelatinous nightmare that looks and feels even more disturbing than if it were drenched in gore. The creature designs were heavily influenced by Salvador Dali paintings, specifically Autumn Cannibalism for one, and you can absolutely see that melting surrealist aesthetic in every frame of that finale. The script went through constant revisions during shooting due to how it was being written. There's a shower scene where Billy sees Jenny's body distort, and it was added mid-production because Yuzna felt they needed another shocking moment earlier in the film. Those therapy sessions with Dr. Cleveland weren't in the original script either. They were written during production to strengthen the entire narrative, which probably saved the movie from being completely incomprehensible. The original opening was supposed to be Billy sneaking back into his house after the hospital, but with the first hour told in flashback, but Yuzna scrapped that structure to avoid confusing the audiences who were already going to have their minds blown by that third act. Man, this entire flick needed a palate cleanser before and after. Here's some trivia that'll blow your mind. Writer Zeph Daniel actually came from a wealthy Beverly Hills family, just like Bill Whitney, and many of the characters are based on real people he knew growing up. Which means somewhere out there, actual rich people watched this movie and potentially saw themselves getting satirized as literally parasitic monsters. And that's cold-blooded, man, and I'm here for it. Also during Ferguson's party, Milo wears a shirt and it says, "Eat the Rich." And that wasn't a costume department choice, it was Brian Yuzna's actual shirt from his college days. A perfect little Easter egg that foreshadows the entire film's plot and concept. And actually, speaking of connections, the hospital exterior is the same one used in Halloween 2, and Billy Warlock's father, Dick Warlock, actually played Michael Myers in that film. It's like the horror universe connecting itself, and that's the third or fourth Michael Myers connection in today's video if you count the hospital. The film's troubled release is a story unto itself. It finished in 1989 and it hit European theaters almost immediately and became a legitimate hit in the UK, where audiences apparently appreciated its class warfare subtext and boundary-pushing effects. But in the US, it barely got released theatrically, sitting on a shelf until 1992 before getting dumped into a tiny run that really went nowhere. Yuzna was genuinely shocked and devastated that American audiences didn't embrace it, but the VHS and cult circuit saved society from total obscurity. It became one of those "you have to see it to believe it" recommendations that spread through horror communities like wildfire. The film's journey from ignored oddity to certified cult classic proves that sometimes the most challenging, uncompromising visions need time to find their audience. And Society has absolutely earned its place in the body horror pantheon alongside Cronenberg's best work. A slight addendum here, my last video, which was grabbing 5 shot-on-video horror flicks, was called out 100% accurately as not truly shot on video, and that's a huge punch in my gut. While these titles are often referred to as classic shot-on-video titles, a true shot-on-video title would be like Sledgehammer, Blood Cult, and even Redneck Zombies, which we have covered. Shot-on-video is really purely shot on consumer-grade camcorders, and I honestly never made the distinction myself when enjoying them. I was just going on vibes, like, look at this is shot on video. I'll gather some truly representative shot on videos for a future video and do it 100% justice, by God. Video violence, which was covered, is a great example, and I've never seen the McPherson tape, which I hear a lot about. Drop your recs in the comments and let's get to that as well. Either way, I hope you guys had a blast going over these with me. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all. And as always, stay cool.